Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome to another Top Cut breakdown video. This time we're talking about the top 16 from the core TCG Online Regional. This top 16 here actually looks surprisingly uniform through like the top few decks. But once you get to the bottom, there's actually some really interesting stuff here to talk about. So we'll get through all that. If you guys are new here, definitely subscribe and hit that bell so you never miss a video. And if you guys want to help support the channel, go down in the description. Check out the many links there that will help out, particularly today. If you guys want to prepare for events just like this, go check out the Patreon. You can read the articles there, see where my head's at competitively. Also inquire about some coaching if you're interested in that. That being said, let's get started. So with the top 16, we do have one Mecha Frieza taking the event for first place. We have 3 King Piccolo, 3 Dark Broly, and 3 Sin Shenron. So this is kind of what I'm talking about, where the tournament looks very uniform. And I guess you could throw the 2 Vegex in there as well. These are a lot of decks that we're used to seeing, and they're in pretty high number. And this is actually kind of weird because we haven't really seen these 3 decks all represent equally as high, right? Like we've seen like 5 KP and 1 Dark Broly. We've seen like, you know, the reverse of that, 5 Dark Broly, 1 King Piccolo. Sin anywhere from like 1 to 3 topping. But the fact that it's kind of like this even mesh of the 3 is pretty interesting. And then we have the 2 Vegex, of course. That's not too surprising. But now the bottom 4 are all pretty surprising. So we have 1 Gogeta Xeno. I did do the deck profile on that, which is on the channel from yesterday if you want to check that out. That was my friend and patron Novin, who it's just so awesome to see players that I'm working with, you know, meet their goals. That's really awesome. And we do have 1 Yellow Baby. This is super crazy. We'll talk about that when we get there. 1 Red Broly, which you don't see all the time. We kind of see it, you know, hit or miss here or there. More so a rogue deck. And then 1 Clash of Fates Goku, a green deck that we haven't seen in a long time. Really good green toolbox. But anyways, let's get through deck by deck. So we do have the Mecha Frieza here. Now this is definitely an interesting build, and I should say all the deck lists down in the description below. Go check them out if you're interested. The deck lists are there. I'm just going to talk about what I think about, you know, the lists as concepts, as well as, you know, these decks and their places in the meta. So with Mecha Frieza, this is actually a mono yellow variant, which we've been seeing less and less of. I think we've been seeing much more of like the blue yellow because Bojack is such a strong card, although it's a bit volatile in the mirror match because relying on Bojack too heavily just to have it be negated by Vegeta's Final Flash, that's a really big liability. So this one being mono yellow, definitely interesting. I still think mono yellow is quite good, and this obviously shows that here, right? Now, one really interesting card that this player teched was Bergamo Lupine Predator. I'll give it a quick read because I'm sure a lot of us don't know what it does. It's a 7-drop, triple attack, barrier, permanent. When all of your opponent's energy is in rest mode, reduce energy cost of this card in your hand by 3. Auto, when you play this card, choose all of your opponent's battle cards, ignoring barriers, switch them to rest mode, and those cards can't be switched to active mode until the start of your next main phase. So I think upon first glance, this card looks kind of weird because it is so energy costly, especially in a deck like Mecha, where you can afford to tap out because you have the ability to use extra cards for free, but you'd probably rather not tap out if you don't need to. But this is a solid, like, one of boss monster. I think it's actually really cool. I actually saw the effects of this in the final game of the stream, where on the previous turn, on his opponent's turn, Mecha Frieza did, you know, Bergamo shenanigans to tap his opponent out with the 5-drop Bergamo, and then played this guy, which was able to then tap all of his blockers. Like, so this is really good where you have a meta with cards like Drum, right? A big barrier blocker that for every other intent and purpose is very difficult to remove from the board or put to rest mode. But this card being able to do that after you tapped all of your opponent's energy out is actually kind of insane. And it does lead kind of nicely into Cell's, you know, Unspeakable Abomination. This is another card that we haven't seen Mecha play so frequently as of late, right? A lot of them have been playing the Supreme Kai of Time SCR, and again, that's a lot to do with the blue-yellow variants of Mecha doing well. And those guys want to have as many, you know, activate battle sorts of interruptions as possible. This is much more of your quote-unquote old-school Mecha, or I guess you could say when Mecha was first spoiled, a lot of people were just playing Cells, you know, Turbo. This seems to be a build geared towards that more than anything else, but it did end up taking the event, which is very cool. We haven't seen Mecha win too often, so I guess pretty cool to put a W under its belt. And then as for the big hitters, we do have 3 King Piccolo. Looking at the list, I mean, King Piccolo is an archetype deck. There's not too much you can do in terms of customizing the main engines, but there is a bit of room for tech. And one of the interesting techs I saw was Broly Crown of Retribution. Now, from what I saw, I believe only one of the lists was playing it, but I think it's a really solid card to tech in King Piccolo. It's a card you should definitely sideboard 2 to 3 copies of. It's very effective against some of the tougher matchups. For instance, against Blue Baby, this card, I mean, that deck's always going to leave up 2+ energy, right? That's how they play the game. They play cards in their opponent's turn. So when they do that, you play Broly Crown, they're going to reveal their hand. They're going to show you Gohan Baby's minions, Heroic Prospect Trunks. things like that. Pulling out of their hand is really, really good. It's also really good in the mirror match, where if they're leaving 2 energy open for like a topo, let's just say, that can be really, really valuable there. Not going to be so good against the aggressive decks, because the aggressive decks obviously will use most of their energy to try and harass you. But I think King Piccolo is pretty good against aggro anyway. The main thing that hurts King Piccolo in the form of aggro is Reboot Gohan, but you can't play Reboot Gohan in best of 1. So in that scenario, King Piccolo kind of has his bases covered. So playing Broly Crown in the main to help against with other mid-range and control decks, I think is a really, really good tech. Very cool to see. And we do have 3 Sin Shenron, so each of these Sin lists were actually the aggro variants, and I believe we saw a similar phenomena last week. So prior to that, we had seen like a decent balance of the aggro versions and the control versions, and even like these mid-range versions here or there. But this week and last week, pretty much all aggro Sin. So, you know, that could be for a few reasons. It could be that, you know, it's a best of 1 environment, and we know aggro is very popular in best of 1, so that could just be the reason why everyone's kind of gravitating towards aggro Sin. Maybe it's because Control Sin takes a little bit too long to win the game, like relying on that tap 6. Even though in Control Sin, you can still pull a Cell Xeno out of nowhere. You still have the good math to do that, but you're typically not playing Pan Great Ape Whisperer, which in the Aggro Sin version allows Cell Xeno to attack twice if you are able to pull that combo off. So it could be a combination of things. Again, aggro's popularity in best of 1, maybe the Control Sin getting to turn 6, maybe that's a little bit too long, and a lot of players are finding they're not able to do that. Could be a few things, but Aggro Sin seems to be doing quite well. And then we have 3 Dark Broly. So interesting about these Dark Broly lists is that 2 of them played Heartfelt Plea and 1 of them did not, but the one that did not play Heartfelt Plea was the highest placing Dark Broly list, which is kind of interesting to think about. Now, when it comes to Dark Broly, we talked about this in the past, where I think in best of 3, you should main deck Heartfelt Plea. I myself included, I've had this experience where you don't always resolve the Heartfelt Plea in many of your games, but when you do, it's just so free. And the downside is so negligible because your super combo can just bottom deck it. If it's ever dead, you can pitch it off Protector of the People. You have these different discard outlets. You can also pitch it off your Piccolo Unison if you're playing that card. You have these different ways to make the downside of Heartfelt Plea very, very minor. But in best of 1, I can understand not playing it because maybe you want to tech some cards like Super Kamehameha or more copies of Protector of the People. Just these cards that you feel like you need to shore up some matchups. So I can understand not playing Heartfelt Plea, and obviously there's some merit to that because the highest placing Dark Broly list was not playing the card. So just something to think about for Dark Broly players. And then we have 2 copies of Vegex in the top 16 here. Now what's interesting to me is that none of them were playing the Catapesla engine, and we've seen this for the past few weeks actually. So when Battle Evolution Booster first came out that weekend, there were a few Vegex lists that played the Catapesla engine and topped the event. I believe Android is one of them if I'm not mistaken, which is kind of cool. But now, the past several weeks, we haven't seen any Catapesla engines in play for Vegex. It's just been these like super low to the ground aggro variants, whereas Catapesla, you kind of want to make its turn forward to get your game plan going. These other versions of Vegex are able to win the game much earlier, and again, that can totally be due to the fact that, you know, players want to play aggro best of 1 webcam events. That's just kind of the trend we've been seeing. But besides that, I mean, I guess when you're looking at the same leader being Vegex and looking at a turn 4 win con versus a turn 2, turn 3 win con, I guess it just does make logical sense to play the variant that can win the game earlier. Why would you want to allow other decks to, you know, get their game plans rolling and whatnot? So I guess that makes just like logical sense. Although I do think the Catapesla engine is quite strong. So maybe if, you know, aggro wasn't so strong in the meta, maybe the Catapesla engine can come back into favor. I guess we'll have to kind of see how things play out over the next few weeks and when set 13 comes out. Then we have the one Gogeta Xeno. Again, I do have the profile on my channel, so if you want a full breakdown of that list, go check that out from yesterday's video. But real quick, I'll talk about it. This is a list that, or a deck rather, that's been doing very well increasingly over the past few weeks, which is really, really cool to see because besides that, for black decks, we've just been seeing Vegex and Dark Broly. So it is nice that we have another contender coming up and doing some things. But besides that, this is a card that I heavily recommended Novin to play in his list, which is Demon God Demigra True Power Unleashed. Even though Gogeta Xeno doesn't fill the drop as easily as Vegex or Dark Broly does, it's still an insane card to play in the deck because the upside is just so good. You notice I've been saying that a lot with like Heartfelt Plea and this card. Realizing the upsides of your different cards in your deck mean a whole lot. Like this card helps so much against red decks, against blue decks, against green decks, just these decks that you know are going to try to grind you out and get to their late game. Demigra can help you beat them to that point it's just so good. Now in Gogeta Xeno, it's just a little bit more awkward because again, you don't fill the drop naturally. You do need to be hitting your fusion pieces to get cards into the drop to play a card like Demigra. But I mean, that's what the deck is built and supposed to do, right? So that's not really too big of a factor. It's just not as easy as like Vegex or Dark Broly, but still a very good card in the deck nonetheless. Then we have the one yellow baby, man. This is actually crazy. We haven't seen this deck do anything since set 9. And if you've been playing since, you know, set 9 or earlier, and baby's been one of your favorite characters or one of your favorite decks to play, this is the same red-yellow combo baby you're used to seeing in set 9. And there are some updates for the modern format. Like this deck plays some unisons and whatnot, which is really cool. I did contact the player. I left a comment on his Facebook post asking if he wanted to do a deck profile. He didn't quite get back to me, but I'm thinking about doing a video talking about the deck anyway, because I do have some thoughts about it. So I might do that in another video, maybe tomorrow. Let me know if you guys are interested in seeing that, and I'll put that together. But yeah, very, very cool. Again, deck list in the description. There's a lot to talk about with it in terms of being a deck that hasn't been played in quite a long time. So if you guys want to see a video on it, definitely let me know, and I'll definitely put that together. We do have the one Red Broly, pretty cookie cutter. I mean, that's just how Red Broly is, kind of like King Piccolo. It's an archetype deck, so it plays its archetype. But pretty cool main deck tech was Beerus Ball, a card that this player chose to include. I'm not exactly sure what he wanted to hit with it. It can hit things like Gohan Baby's Minion and Heroic Prospect, so I guess against like Blue Baby, that's not too bad. And I guess also it's drums, so maybe there are some pretty good applications to the card that I wasn't thinking about before that. But I am definitely curious as to why the player, you know, wanted to main Beerus Ball. I wonder if he had like a very specific card he wanted to out with it. But I did just name a few, so that definitely gives me a better idea of what he was trying to do with that, right? And then finally, we have one Clash of Fates Goku. Very cool, just like green toolbox. Now, this list was playing 4 Roshi, which is kind of interesting. You know, it kind of might have been this player's last hurrah with Roshi before it gets banned in set 13, which is definitely possible. The card's really strong. I honestly don't think that Roshi getting banned, like, murders green. It's just that green hasn't been doing all that well lately anyway. Yeah, we had the Majin Vegetas and sometimes the Reboot Gohans and Best of 3 and sometimes Turles, sometimes Green Gotenks, but you got to realize they're very sporadic when they top. And that's just more so due to their engines and archetypes being somewhat subpar compared to everything else in the meta, right? Now, Clash of Fates Goku doesn't really have a true archetype. I mean, it kind of does, but people don't generally play it. It's much more of a green toolbox deck, so this player was obviously able to do quite well with just green good cards. Their unison of choice was Metacooler Terrifying Horde, which I think is an incredible unison. It provides so much value, but turn 3 in this aggro meta seems just a little bit late, but if you're able to get there, I can see it providing a whole lot of value. But anyways, guys, that's going to wrap up today's video. Once again, deck lists are in the description. Leave a comment. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time.